Recording in progress.
As I'm sure you've noticed, there's a lot of people throwing around the word endemic. I actually just heard that Bonnie Henry may or may not be talking in those terms tonight. I just wondered, what are your thoughts on this? What does endemic really mean?
All it means is that the disease is present in a defined geographical area for an appreciable length of time with a reproduction number hovering around 1. So it's
Okay.
not declining and it's not increasing. It says nothing about how bad it is, whether it's at a high level or a low level. So I think politically, the word seems to be being conflated with we're done with this and let's move on. But
Yeah.
if we're done with this and we're endemic at a high level, we're not moving on. That means a constant state of crisis for the rest of our lives, and that's not tolerable. So measles is endemic, for example. And
Right.
and measles, where most people are fully vaccinated, it pops up now and then, um, but there's like a steady state of it in the background. A handful of people are unvaccinated, but it's not at a high enough level to create a crisis or challenge to public health. One could argue that the flu is endemic, even though it does come in waves, and in certain seasons it'll come up and come down again. But on average, the reproduction number stays around 1. So it isn't well defined, and the definition also says that it's the number of cases remains the same without including importation. So there is an element there of border concerns that is not being addressed either. I think when people use the word endemic, they mean to say something else. They mean to say it's present and we're living with it, but they haven't thought through what that looks like yet. When we're dealing with infectious diseases like that, there are a variety of possible outcomes. There's extinction, which is the ideal, not for us, but for the disease. We've never made a disease extinct. Some have gone extinct on their own, we think. There's eradication, and we've done that twice, rinderpest and smallpox. And eradication simply is we wipe it off the face of the earth, except for in some laboratories. I don't know why we're keeping those things, but all right. There's elimination, which essentially is we drive it from our borders for the most part. And we've done that for a variety of diseases, like polio has been eliminated from Canada and many countries. It still lingers in some countries, which is why it's not been eradicated yet. And there's control. So controlled disease is one that it pesters us all the time, but we have a handle on it. And this disease will probably be somewhere between control and elimination if we do things right. I think there was a time we possibly could have eradicated it, but there's some things working against us, like the fact it also infects animals, and so there's this reservoir that we can't extinguish it from, and the fact that the vaccines are uncertain exactly what their efficaciousness is in certain contexts. The smallpox vaccine, for example, offered lifetime immunity. It was extraordinarily efficacious. It was well tolerated by young and old alike. And if you got the disease, you got immunity for life afterwards. It's not clear that's happening here. So a lot of things working against us there. So the word endemic, I don't think it's useful. It's not a useful word. Scientists meant it in a specific way, meaning we won't see the waves anymore. So there won't be every few months we lock down the country. What it means is it's always here or it's always there. Hopefully it's always here. So
Does it also mean at a state, sort of at a state where it's not disrupting society and
it, it,
affecting healthcare systems?
it doesn't mean that innately.
Doesn't. Okay.
But so when we talk about it, we should add that caveat, endemic, at a level at which it is not something we should worry about. That's what we want. Actually,
Right.
what we want is endemic at 0, 0 cases all the time. But it's tolerable to have a handful of cases all the time that we never have to think about again.
Right.
Like in the bastion of Western privilege here in Ontario, for example, we still get cases of some enteric diseases that you usually find in a developing world country, but they don't make the news because there's not that many of them. That's where we want COVID to be, popping up,
Right.
but not newsworthy.
Right.
So, and that probably means applying the pressure, including vaccination mandates, including testing, mask wearing, distancing, even some economic restrictions to drive it down until we have a hard enough rock to put it on top to keep it there. And that large enough rock is population immunity. And like you look at the various flu species, the population builds up sufficient immunity so that it doesn't create that much penetration anymore. But newborns are always susceptible because they're not born with immunity. So we're always
Right.
going to have a situation where newborn babies are going to be susceptible to COVID until we develop a vaccine for that age group or some extraordinarily good treatment options, like we did for rotavirus, which was a big problem for the pediatric population for a long time until the rotavirus vaccine was invented. Now you rarely see rotavirus.
Also, too, I would imagine it's going to affect like the flu does. You're going to have your most vulnerable as well, correct? In terms of
Yes,
very
exactly.
young people, for instance.
Exactly. But again, we have a really effective vaccine. So it's a matter of making sure it remains effective and making sure that enough people have accepted that vaccine to keep the population immune. So the difficult thing that the public, media, and policymakers have thinking about this is distinguishing between the individual experience and the population experience. And they're kind of distinct here. As individuals, our risk is always quite low with COVID. If you get the disease, you're probably going to be fine, most of us. But if enough people get it, a significant proportion are going to struggle with it, if not die. And if enough people get it, the healthcare system is going to be impacted. So couching it in those terms has been a struggle as well.
What are your thoughts in terms of how we need to be thinking about this? Or do we need to be thinking about this as getting it to a certain level in Canada? And is that possible if we don't take global action? So
it is possible. So
okay.
it is possible, but it takes extraordinary action. So let's say we vaccinate 100% of people in Canada with 3 doses. 3 doses, apparently the vaccine effectiveness against transmission is like 70%, which is really good. It probably will quell transmission sufficiently, and we throw on some mask wearing and stuff, we can get this thing really under control fast. But then you'd have to patrol the borders really well for imported reinfection and hold steady and hope that the rest of the world doesn't churn out new variants that threaten our vaccine effectiveness, as it will eventually, unless this beast is tamed.
Yeah.
So you cannot solve a global problem locally. It has to be a global effort. The virus rather doesn't respect artificial human borders and doesn't care what language you speak, what the color of your skin is. It just wants a host. So it behooves us to prioritize global vaccination with an effective vaccine option that addresses the current circulating variant. Now, I understand we have some options coming forward. So these universal coronavirus vaccines that are being worked on. They're probably good against all possible variants, which is exciting. So there are exciting technologies coming down the pipeline. We shouldn't have to rely upon these technologies. I think if enough people just, were to control their exposures long enough, the wave can be subsided until we get sufficient manufacturing of the existing vaccines in place. So there are options that we can pursue.
Would you agree with so Dr. Tedros, who yesterday in his briefing talked about, he said we can get past, and he was careful not to use the word endemic, I think, I'm sure on purpose, because he said we can get past the acute phase of this virus within a year if we get all countries vaccinated up to a level of 70%, including developing nations. Does that ring true for you as
Sure.
well?
I think the 70% sounds rather arbitrary to me, but a number, a significant number, 70%, I suspect, comes about because that's where the Western nations seem to be plateauing when you factor in the vaccine hesitancy. So that's not an unachievable level to aim for. But yeah, totally. We can get this under control. We can get this control like in the next 5 months if we prioritize vaccine manufacture and distribution. Make it a Marshall Plan kind of endeavor, as I've been calling for a long time. This should have been a global priority months ago, if not 2 years ago. And we would have been out of this well before now.
So to get to where we want to be, when people are saying endemic, largely incorrectly,
Yeah.
when people are saying, hey, we want to move to this phase, or when you have Saskatchewan Premier Moe yesterday talking about how, well, we just have to learn to live with it. What message do you want to get across in terms of what we need to do to get?
Well, first of all, I never liked the term learn to live with it. because it's disrespectful for those who can't live with it. They're immunocompromised, people with long-term disabilities, children who will not be able to live with this. And it really prioritizes an individual's need for certain freedoms over other individuals' right to exist. That always offends me a bit. So what we need to do is get booster shots, get everyone fully vaccinated. What fully vaccinated means is 3 doses. That's the new definition of fully vaccinated. And people are going to say, you're moving the goalpost. No, we're responding to the changing situation. A new beast came knocking at our front door. That beast is Omicron. Omicron responds with 3 doses. So that's the new normal. Get 3 doses into everybody as quickly as we can. Then we can have a conversation about what the new normal is. And remember, I think everyone needs to understand that this isn't going to be the rest of our lives. Every pandemic ends. Every single one. Some sooner rather than later. And it's the choices we make now that determine if it's going to happen sooner rather than later, and what lies in wait when the tide recedes. So how so?
Yeah.
Well, Omicron is infecting a lot of people. Those who are unvaccinated are more likely to be infected and more likely to have serious disease, possibly more likely to have long COVID. We're not really sure there. So it may leave the gift of immunity, if we're lucky. That would be nice. It was definitely going to leave the curse of a embattled healthcare system and possibly the further curse of long-term disability that we're going to have to deal with for decades to come.
Right.
It'll be nice to avoid that with a more aggressive vaccination uptake and a more reasoned approach to slowing transmission. If you slow transmission long enough, more people get vaccinated. We get a vaccine option for kids under 5. That's coming soon, sometime this year. It'd be great if they get vaccinated. And just lower the risk overall for people to suffer. This is a calculus of reducing human suffering. That's all it is. The virus is going to have its way with us in one way or the other, but what we decide to do determines the price we pay for that experience.
Okay. And finally, just to go back to the sort of global, to the global approach here, how do you think we can, is there anything that you want to say, that how do we get Canadians to think that way and get Canadians to care, right? I mean, so we've tried to do this story before. I mean, it's the right thing to do, of course, vaccinate the world. But there's also a self-interest there.
Totally.
Right?
Look, there is no New Zealand variant. There's no Japanese variant. There's no Bhutan variant. Why? Because those places, for the most part, have controlled COVID well. If we help the rest of the world control COVID well, there'll be no variants coming out of those countries anymore, and we won't have to play this ridiculous game every few months anymore. This horrible, atrocious movie can come to an end. So that's what it's strictly from a self-interest perspective. Let's stop this disease in its tracks by stopping it everywhere. Playing this locally does not work, as we've seen.
That is fantastic. That is exactly what I needed to hear from you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Is there anything you wanted to add that we didn't cover?
No, I think I got it all.
Thank you so much. Big hug to your cute baby.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Bye-bye.